Our study is called Text-Based Event Detection, Deciphering Date Information Using Graph Embeddings. Information that you see in the context of social networking analysis changes over time. The study of time is especially crucial because it can help document individuals, such as their changes in points of view and the progress of events to a much larger scale. For this study, we use graph representation learning to model these changes over time. The reason that we choose graph representation learning as our method is because graphs are powerful data structures that maintain information while at the same time yielding minimal data loss. Graph representation learning is also becoming increasingly common in event detection literature. This project, number 117E566, is funded by the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey, also known as TÜBİTAK. There are several major contributions in our study. The first contribution is gaining key information from a text-based dataset of social media posts. In this case, the key information that we gain is author information, such as which author wrote a particular post, as well as date information, such as on which date a particular post was written. The second contribution is understanding concepts at varying levels of granularity. We accomplish this by organizing all of the information in our dataset into a hierarchical graph. The third contribution is extracting key concepts using the graph representation learning algorithm Notewek. Notewek is a graph representation learning algorithm that was introduced in the year 2016. The fourth contribution is the enrichment of graph embeddings. For this step, we use a transfer learning inspired approach to improve our graph embeddings so as to improve our results in the evaluation phase. The fifth contribution is paving the way for future research in event detection. We believe that we accomplished this because we got pretty good results in the evaluation phase. What is event detection? Event detection is basically what helps us detect events of interest by identifying event triggers. The event trigger could be a lot of things. It could be a word, a phrase, or it could even be an entire sentence, depending on how long the body of text we're looking at is. If an event trigger is a word, it is usually a noun or a verb. In our experiments, however, we found that an event trigger could even be a hashtag, because a hashtag also does a pretty good job at identifying what an event is. The event trigger is basically what sums up or best describes the event. We proposed in our study an end-to-end framework which retrieves potential event triggers for a given date. Our end-to-end framework uses the Notewek algorithm, which is a graph representation learning algorithm that was introduced in the year 2016. The Notewek algorithm looks at a graph, it takes a graph, and it traverses through all of the vertices in the graph using a random walk procedure. This random walk procedure combines the BFS as well as the DFS approach. The algorithm retrieves a vector representation for each node in the graph, which is also known as the node embedding. So this step, in other words, is basically the feature extraction phase in our end-to-end framework. Node embeddings include information about each node and its neighborhood. So nodes that are, for example, neighboring are usually supposed to have highly similar vector representations. Nodes with similar characteristics, as a result, have similar vector representations. Our end-to-end framework includes a random walk procedure. Because our end-to-end framework includes the Notewek algorithm, any methodology that the Notewek algorithm includes is also a methodology that our end-to-end framework includes as well. So because the Notewek algorithm includes the random walk procedure, our end-to-end framework includes it as well. And the Noteweg algorithm also uses the skipgram methodology. And as a result, we incorporate the skipgram methodology into our end-to-end framework. The skipgram method is commonly used in natural language processing. So what skipgram does is skipgram actually predicts the most related context words for a given word. So in a sentence, for example, if you're focusing on a particular word, the skipgram algorithm predicts the words which are most likely going to appear in that sentence, which are most likely going to appear around that word. The word-to-vec algorithm is also used by the note-to-vec algorithm, and the word-to-vec algorithm also uses the skipgram method as well. The word-to-vec algorithm treats each node in the graph as a word, and as a result, instead of the note-to-vec algorithm, basically, instead of taking the context words for a word, it basically finds the context, the neighborhood nodes for a given node. Therefore, when applying the node-to-vec algorithm, word-to-vec maximizes the log probability of a node's neighborhood instead of the log probability of a given word's context words, like it would when applied on a text dataset directly rather than on a graph. Our graph contains nodes, and every single node that appears in our dataset represents one of the 4 following types of information. So every single node that appears in our dataset is either represents a date, a user ID, a tweet ID, or a word. Therefore, we have created a paradigm that builds connections between key information, such as date information and user information, and text information. Previous methods that were originally very commonly used in natural language processing, such as word-to-vec and doc-to-vec, do not accomplish this, and they do not build correlations between information such as date information and user information and text information. Here's an example of what our graph would look like. So every single year that appears in our data set also is included into our graph, and we basically take all the years that appear in our data set and join them to a central node, which in this image here we refer to as year. Then we take all of the months that appear in our data set, create a separate node for each of these months, and connect them to the corresponding year node. And we also create a specific node for every single date that appears in our data set and attach them to their corresponding month nodes. So for example, if there was at least one tweet in our data set that was written on May 21, 2018, we will add May 21, 2018 as a node to our graph. Then we will attach it to its corresponding month node, which would be May 2018, and we would attach that to its corresponding year node, which would be 2018. Then we would attach that to the central node. We also make sure that all consecutive date nodes are connected. So November 22, 2017 and November 21, 2017 are connected. We also make sure that all consecutive month nodes are connected. So April 2017 and May 2017 are also connected. Then the graph extends further. For each date that appears in our dataset, we include the particular date node as well. And then for every single tweet that appears in that month, so for every single tweet that was published on that date, we attach the tweet ID node of that tweet to the corresponding date node. Every single tweet on Twitter has its own unique tweet ID. Also, every single user on Twitter has his or her own unique multi-digit user ID as well. So for example, if on March 28, 2017, we have two different tweets, tweet ID 1 and tweet ID 2, we attach those two tweet ID nodes to March 28, 2017. Then for each tweet, we attach the user ID node for that particular tweet to the tweet ID node for that particular tweet. So in this case, we connect user ID 1 to tweet ID 1. We also connect user ID 2 to tweet ID 2. We also attach all of the words that appear in each tweet in sequence to the tweet ID node. So for example, for tweet ID 1, if we have a tweet that reads, "There is a football game tomorrow," we attach all of those words in sequence to the tweet ID node tweet ID 1. Because these sequences of words resemble a snake, we call this graph that we introduce in our study a snake graph. Another really important thing worth noting is that every single node in our snake graph is unique. As a result, overlapping words basically appear only once. And as a result, like you see here, these two different tweets use the same word. They have an overlapping word, and as a result, you see an overlap in the graph as well. So, for example, these two tweets read, "There is a football game tomorrow," and "Who's ready for LSU football?" As a result, these two different sequences overlap each other because they use the same word. We basically make sure that we enrich our embeddings, our node embeddings, in order to get even better results. And we basically intentionally do this in two ways. The first method is by creating a hierarchical graph like the one we just showed here. We create a hierarchical graph like the one we just showed here, and we connect, first of all, the date nodes that appear in our data set to their corresponding month nodes, and we connect the month nodes to their corresponding year nodes, and as a result, the graph is hierarchical based on date information. We also make sure that we connect the nodes for each consecutive month, as we showed earlier, and we connect the nodes for each consecutive date as well. We also use a transfer learning inspired approach. So for this approach, we normally, when not using this transfer learning inspired approach, we simply apply the node-to-WEC algorithm on the graph and get the node embeddings. However, when using this transfer learning inspired approach, we basically take the graph, the snake graph, and we apply the node-to-WEC algorithm not only on the snake graph, but we also apply it on a very large news text corpus written in the Turkish language. We apply the node-to-WEC algorithm on both the graph as well as the news text corpus. We first train the word-to-WEC model with the news text corpus, and we apply the random walks on the graph and the skipgram method on the text corpus. Thus, we derive enriched embeddings from applying the node-to-WEC algorithm on the graph and the news text corpus as well. And we actually find out in the evaluation phase that we do get somewhat better results. Our study has 3 different experiments in the evaluation phase. For the first experiment and for the most major experiment in our study, we take a certain number of dates, and for each date, we get the set of k nearest words in the embedding space. Because we get 10 different words for each date in this particular study, k would equal to 10. We accomplish this by taking the vector representation corresponding to each date and the vector representations corresponding to each word, and for each date we use a cosine similarity measure to find the words, the 10 words with the highest the 10 words whose vector representations have the highest cosine similarity to the vector representation of the given date. Because there is more than one event per day, we clustered the embeddings of words. So this basically means that instead of just finding one word with the highest similarity to each date, we find more than one, k, and in this particular study, we find the 10 most similar words to each date that we selected. In information retrieval, the 2 most common methods are referred to as precision and recall. Precision is the percentage of extracted results which are relevant, and recall is the percentage of total relevant results that are correctly classified by the algorithm. We only calculated the precision because of the high processing time requirements. For the first experiment, we took a data set that consisted of tweets that were published between February 15, 2017 until May 31, 2017. From this data set we basically constructed our graph, and we selected from this graph and from this data set, we selected 17 days as our main dates, and we took the most similar 10 words for each given date. And the dates that we selected were days on which one of Turkey's major football teams competed in the UEFA. And our model basically helped us identify the closest words, which in this case were the crucial nouns, verbs, and even hashtags based on the dates on which users mentioned them. So the nouns, verbs, and hashtags that we found were basically the event triggers that we mentioned earlier. And they usually did a really good job at indicating what events either occurred on that day or were otherwise mentioned on those particular days. So here are the results we have here. For each day, we calculated the percentage of relevant words. And a word is basically, according to our definition, relevant if it occurred on that particular day on which it was published, or it was a highly publicized upcoming event. And you see in the graph here that for the enriched embeddings, we used a window size of 5. We did not use a window size of 10. And the reason for that was because we could not train our model with the enriched embeddings for a window size of 10 within a reasonable amount of time. And as a result, we did not calculate the corresponding precision results for the enriched embeddings with a window size of 10. For the non-enriched embeddings, which are basically the embeddings that we got from simply applying the node-to-wick algorithm on the graph, we basically applied this algorithm with a window size of 10 and a window size of 5 and a window size of 10. For the enriched embeddings, we got a slightly higher result. For the enriched embeddings with a window size of 5, our results were 72.9%, 124 out of 170 total results that we got. For the non-enriched embeddings, we got 71.2%, which would be 121 out of 170 for a window size of 5, and also for a window size of 10, we got the same exact results. So this basically shows that when we use the enriched embeddings, we did actually get slightly better results, and they did slightly improve our results as well. The second experiment involved creating a visual representation of the relationships between the dates. So we take two different dates. In particular, the dates are February 21, 2017 and March the 2nd, 2017. So for instance, for February 21, 2017, we take the vector representation of that date and then the vector representation of the following date, which would be February 22, 2017. We get the cosine similarities between those two dates and we plot the result onto the graph. And then once again for the same date, for February 21, 2017, and 2 days later, we once again get the cosine similarities of those two vector representations, and we enter the results. We plot the results for the difference for the cosine similarities between those 2 days as well. And we do the same thing, so on and so forth, for the next 33 days for each of those 2 days and plot our results. For all of the coordinates which correspond to February 21, 2017 are blue, and all of the coordinates which correspond to March the 2nd, 2017 are orange. And as you can see here, there are very similar results. On the first 2 days, the results are more similar than they ever will be in the future. They are very highly similar. And then the cosine similarity plummets from the second day onwards, and for the rest of the month, the results pretty much oscillate over time. But you can see here that the cosine similarity between the first 2 dates are always the highest. And the relevance between a date and 2 days later, pretty much 2 consecutive dates, a first date and a second date, are very similar to each other, but then the events that are mentioned on the first date become quite irrelevant from 2 days later and onwards. We use a very similar method here. So this is also, once again, the second experiment. We take the average similarities of 16 days and their consecutive 33 days. Here you see very similar results as in the previous image. So once again, the cosine similarities, the average cosine similarities between day 1 and day 2 are once again very similar, more similar than they ever will be for the upcoming month. And then there is a decrease from the second day onwards, and the results do appear to plateau between roughly the 5th day and the 20th day, and there is also a slight increase after the 30th day, but for the most part, the results are the cosine similarities between a given day and several days later decrease as time goes on. For the third experiment, we basically create a TSNE graph. So for this experiment, we have a data set of 35,020 tweets. We put all of these tweets, once again, organize all of these tweets into the snake graph, and we get our vector representations for each date. Within this particular data set, there are 88 days, and this particular data set spans through the month of June 2017, July 2017, and August of 2017. And there are 88 days in this, different days in this data set, and as a result, there are 88 different coordinates in this TSNE graph. Each coordinate, of course, represents a different date. The indigo coordinates correspond to the month of June 2017. The teal coordinates correspond to the month of July 2017, and the yellow coordinates correspond to the month of August of 2017. And as you can see here, there is an overlap between June 2017 and July 2017, and there is also an overlap between July 2017 and August 2017, but there is no overlap between the months of June 2017 and August of 2017. In conclusion, the main contribution of our study is our end-to-end framework, and the main contribution of our end-to-end framework is the snake graph, which we introduced in our study. And this graph maps the relationships between different entities in our text-based data sets, such as key information, which would be the user information and the date information, and the word information. And this method works even on a very small data set that contains possibly less than 50,000 tweets. This study proves also that we can use a transfer learning inspired approach on a graph representation learning method such as Notoec, and this method is effective as well. We also find that mapping text-based data onto our graph made it easy for us to find events based on dates, and will no doubt help us find other information based on other factors. In the future, we hope to be able to use similar methods to find information such as hashtag information, as well as information that might, and events that might occur in the future. Lastly, we hope that our research will pave the way for future studies in event detection. And that concludes our presentation.